Good evening, councillors and officers. I've been confirmed that the webcast is running this evening. Just to confirm, we're going to use the clock that is indicated by the laptop, because that is correct. And all of our other watches' clocks are running a bit slow. So we're actually on time. There's no fire alarm scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and the side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. As I've confirmed already, the webcast is running, but if I could just ask members, because we are in the chamber, if when we're making our comments and speaking this evening, if we could lean forward and speak into the microphone rather than sitting back, because we've had reports that sometimes our voices are not captured on the webcast. I have no apologies for this evening for absence. Resignations and replacements.
Sorry, Chair, I wasn't sure whether you were going to announce it, but I'm substituting for Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, and I can confirm. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm substituting for Councillor Miller.
Thank you. And this leaves me with needing to appoint a vice chair, and I would like to nominate Councillor Mrs. Tucker, if the committee would agree. Okay, thank you. As Councillor Mrs. Tucker makes her way, is there any declarations of interest or whipping decisions? Councillor Mitchell.
I guess it applies to quite a lot of people, but some of the services that we're discussing are in my ward, but I have no particular position either way, and therefore I'm not prejudiced as far as I can make out.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Leake.
The proposed new circular route from Stretfield Say to Stony Heath goes right past my front door, but I don't need to declare it because I never use a bus. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs. Reid.
Thank you. Same as Councillor Mitchell, some of the bus routes referred to are through my ward.
Councillor Gardner.
As we're going through this, then obviously it's Route 154, Stratfield Say, is in my ward.
I don't think we do. I mean, maybe we could just make the assumption that the buses are running through some members' wards. Councillor James.
I've never used a community bus in Whitchurch. I just thought I'd better mention that in case.
Thank you very much. I think we'll move on. We've got no urgent items scheduled for this evening's meeting, which takes us on to confirming the minutes of the meeting held on the 30th of January 2014. Do you have any comments at all? Okay, thank you. Okay, we have no members of the public speaking this evening. And the relevant portfolio holder is with us tonight for the buses, not planning and infrastructure, but I'm sure we all understand that. But she will speak at the end of the presentation, and that will be her opportunity to address the committee. No referrals from other committees or the council. no issues referred by the Cabinet, which takes us on to item agenda 12, which is the Public Transport Subsidy Review, which will be presented by the officers Lisa Kirkpark-Thorpe this evening.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight and present this information. Really interested in hearing your views so that we can help shape the Cabinet report that's due in March this year. Just want to begin by talking about the project initiation, really, and explaining where this started in terms of the commissioning business unit. We picked this up, the finalised document, in the summer of 2012, and I've just put on the slide there some of the key objectives that we were aiming to achieve. Value for money. We're looking at alternative and innovative methods of delivering different transport models. Creating efficiencies where we could, and then coming back to members with a range of options that are based on evidence, which we've got for you tonight. Again, just to clarify really the services that have been supported by the Borough Council, we've split them into two phases. This first phase, phase one that we were discussing this evening, are services that we fund exclusively or have a significant involvement where we can affect change. Second phase of services are those where we're actually a funding partner, and that will be to a future meeting where we will be able to influence change with those partners. The services themselves are noted on page 15 of the main review document, that's Appendix A, with the services that we're discussing tonight shaded in grey. But just for clarity, we're talking about the Whitchurch Community Bus, services 21 to 24, the Stratfield Say Shopper, which is service 154, Old Basing and Stony Heath taxi shares, and also we're going to talk about a pilot of evening services which has been proposed as well. Really, just to try and talk through for a moment the stages that we've been through review will hopefully put some perspective on the papers that you've got tonight. So I've drawn a grid there just to highlight when different stages of the review have occurred. We started off back in September 2012, initially looking at some public consultation events in Brighton Hill and the Popley area, which was something directly requested by this committee. We held some events with partners as an opportunity for residents really to put their views forward, their concerns in those areas, and be able to speak directly to some senior representatives of both the County Council and Stagecoach. We thought that was a really valuable opportunity. From then on, we negotiated with those partners and others as well to gain some changes in the services, which resulted in some more frequent services in some of those key areas, and the reliability of services in the Brighton Hill area being improved by some changes that were made. We then started really in the sort of February time of 2013, gathering information about the majority of the services that we subsidise, and that involved pulling together information on the existing usage, costs, route information, and then some survey information from resident surveys, youth surveys, and community-led plans. That's information that we had, if you like, already. We then wanted to update that and bring the community involved by undertaking public surveys. And we did this in June and July 2013 in a combination of online applications, if you like, in terms of getting views, some face-to-face surveying work on the buses themselves, and 10,000 hard copies of leaflets were distributed around the community to try and get those views back. We got 1,600 responses across the board for those, which we felt was quite a good return from the various methods, and they were split really pretty much 50-50 between the face-to-face returns, if you like, and those two other methods. We also did some benchmarking with 20 authorities that were most statistically like Basingstoke and Dean to give us some perspective really about other authorities' approach, their good practice, and the levels of expenditure that they incurred on transport, which just gives a feeling of where Basingstoke and Dean sat really. The information was then analysed and options have been produced based on trends and the feedback, cost per trip, different provision that was available and where we saw gaps. From then we moved to equality impact and risk assessments for the options that were being considered. And then we went back on to public consultation on the options that we'd drawn together. And that consultation continues tonight, obviously, with getting your views prior to going to Cabinet. Just like to point out as well, at various key points during the timeline that you see in front of you, we've been interacting with the Community Transport Working Group with 5 members cross-party to gain their thoughts really in terms of early on with the benchmarking information, with the survey information that came back before presenting to the political groups, and also ultimately in the options that we're bringing forward to you tonight in terms of gaining their views. In terms of implementation after decisions in March taken by Cabinet, the deadlines will vary, and that will be based on the procurement that's required on a case-by-case basis, really. So deadlines will be, timescales will be sort of variable on that. And there will be some further focus group work regarding late evening services pilot if that option is taken forward. So I've mentioned just already there, just to give some key points, I suppose, regarding the benchmarking with the local authorities, the headlines. Interestingly, the Borough Council spent more than per annum than all the respondents that we got responses back from that exercise collectively. Most authorities were spending somewhere in the region of about £50,000 a year on transport, which was predominantly around a sort of dial-a-ride type of service. The exception to that being Eastleigh, which had a higher spend, but as I say, cumulatively we spent those organisations that responded spent less than we do as a single body. We were trying to seek innovation and get this an evidence of sort of policy in terms of approaches from these organisations, but we were a little short in terms of responses that came back on that area. In terms of the public survey that we've mentioned, those 1,600 responses, we did circulate the results of those prior to Christmas for your digestion. It was rather a large document, so we wanted to try and provide sufficient time for you to appreciate all of that. Obviously, the independent information for each of these case studies is being drawn out into the reports that you've also received. The headlines there really, in terms of the public survey, was that there was high general satisfaction, we felt, with bus services. 61% across the board of those respondents scored their satisfaction as existing bus services at 4 or 5 out of 5. And if you bring in a score of 3, 4, 5, that raises to 88%. So we were quite pleasantly surprised by those results. 45% of respondents as well said that existing services met their needs. So obviously there's room for improvement there, but again, it gives some indication of the way of how public felt at that time. So just drawing down some of the key headlines, we are keeping this reasonably short and succinct because you have most of the information, all the information in the reports in front of you. There's some headlines for those services that we are discussing tonight. And at this point, I think it's probably helpful as well. I just draw your attention to a numbering error that we found in the main report, which is Appendix A. There are some options that mention option A, B, and C later in the report, which actually should be read as 1, 2, and 3. So essentially, if it says A, it should be 1, B, 2, and C, 3. Apologies for that error. It's a copying error that happened when we tried to clarify things with the survey itself. So back to the headline information. In terms of Whitchurch, the community bus there has 1,381 passenger trips a year, with the current provider suggesting that there's probably no more than 10 to 20 different actual people that use that service in total. A very, very, very small amount of those service users, in fact, 0.5% of the trips, that was 7 in a year, were not using concessionary fares that used cash. So it's virtually entirely used by concessionary fare users. And the cost per trip for those subsidies works out at £9.28. And I just wanted to go on to give you some of the same information for the other services that we've got there, so you can feel those key figures. So for services 21 to 24, the there's around about 13,000 passenger trips a year for service 2122, which is to the west, if you like, of the A34 on the maps that are in the front part of the room. Around 3,000 trips, just over 3,000 trips a year for the other service, which is 2324, which is just to the west again of the A34, just below Newbury. And again, pulling concessionary fair use information from that, we're only able to ascertain that from the feedback from the responses that we gain from the survey, because we don't have that information on service by service basis. But 33% of service 21 was concessionary fair use, and 64% of service 22. So there's a mix there between a high percentage on one side, if you like, one route of concessionary fair users against the other. And service 23 and 24 were both quite high concessionary fair users at 90% for the 23 and 67% for 24. The cost per trip across that, average across that those services, because it is a combined contract, so we're unable to separate out the actual costings for each of those services as outlined in the report, is £3.37 per trip. No, it's my Stony Heath ones. Oh, thank you. So just moving on to the same information for the Stratfield Say shopper. Again, for use in the borough, there were 508 passenger trips made in a year. Again, concessionary fair use based on the responses to our survey was 100% concessionary fair use, and that worked out at £6.73 per trip subsidy. It's probably appropriate, talking through the Stratfield Say shopper part at this moment, just to update the committee about some sort of latest information that came in 2 days ago. There's a mention in the report that West Berkshire were considering withdrawing their funding for Service 154, and their executive member confirmed that that's what they are going to do last week. We got that information 2 days ago. So they are, as of this forthcoming financial year, 2014-15, withdrawing their financial support towards the Stratfield Say shopper service. Taxi shares in Stony Heath. We have 876 passenger trips a year, and we were a little unclear in terms of the level of concessionary fair use because we weren't able to gain that information, but it does bring out a cost per trip of £7.95. In Old Basing, we have around 1,800 passenger trips, and based again on the survey responses, 93% of those are concessionary fair users, with a cost per trip of £3.93. Now I'd like to pass over to the portfolio holder, Councillor Ossleton, who will just talk through the preferred options.
Okay, I haven't been given a microphone, so I have to stand. Can you hear me now? If I sit down, yes, stop there. Right, can you hear? Yes, thank you. What I've done actually is I've looked through the document and have been working with the officers, and basically I've just put together the options for the buses that we're discussing tonight. This is a living document, as you will have heard, and we are having changes. 2 days ago we heard about 154, and what I've actually put down here is not set in tablets of stone, and if we could do them bus service by bus service, it would be easier then that I can put down your comments ready for cabinet. Whitchurch Community Bus, the revised current route within Whitchurch and linked commercial route to either Basingstoke or Andover. And if I get my paper here, Whitchurch Town Council have asked to have input, and it says noted and offered Whitchurch Town Council input if option C, which is the one I'm talking about, which is option 3, is agreed, provided contact details of BCT for this to occur. So we have taken on board with what has been said there. Services 21 to 24. We have a new option that was put on the table, I think it was earlier this week as well. they would like to integrate, this is Hampshire County Council, and we're working with them at the moment, they would like to integrate services 21 and 22. This goes from Andover to Newbury and is the one that actually takes 12,000, the 21-22 takes 12,000 trips a year, correct?
Sorry, 21, 22.
Yeah, 12,000.
Yeah, sorry, the Service 7 goes from Andover to Newbury.
That's right.
21, 22 sort of does the top part just below Newbury, but essentially on the top part,
We're going to
they cover the same route, and it's on the maps outside, superimposed with yellow.
And we will replace 23 and 24, which only has just under 3,000, with a taxi share. Services 1540 Basingstoke Heath, you've heard about that. It's just been discussed. Mark's just discussed it. And then we'll look at the late evening service pilot, which would be option 2, which is to provide late evening services on route 1, 2 and 3 between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturday evenings only for a trial period of 9 months. Mark is very au fait with all of these services, so I await your comments, please, and we can answer any questions. Do you want to move?
Okay, thank you very much. As I say, what I'd like to do is we take the report case study by case study. So the first wave of the report will be starting from page 33 of 77, if that's of any help. And before we start that, if anybody would like to make comments of the report up to the point of page 32. Okay, Councillor Watts. Councillor Keith Watts.
Thank you. I just want to say that I disagree with the whole basis of this, in that we shouldn't be beginning by looking at existing routes. We ought to be beginning by looking for need. And since we're starting with the existing routes, the people who are responding to consultation are those who benefit from the existing routes. We haven't heard from anyone apart from Councillor Mrs. Tucker talking about areas that aren't covered by the existing routes.
Thank you. If I can remind us that we're having questions first, and then we'll come to debate. Thank you. Councillor Leake, please.
Thank you. I'm generally opposed to any form of subsidy on public transport other than in respect of transport for the elderly and the infirm. And I should add that I do fall into that category, but as you have already heard, I don't use buses, so I feel I can actually make this statement. I have, for instance, consistently opposed the subsidy of the central shuttle, as I hope you're all aware. What really concerns me is the table on page 10, which shows that many other councils spend very little on public transport subsidies, whereas we are spending over £600,000. So I question in the first place why we are not addressing this vast cost and how it can be reduced to a level similar to other authorities. And then I think specifically looking at the need of those who I describe as elderly and infirm, and hopefully cut all the other subsidies out. But it seems to me we're fiddling while Rome burns. We need to get rid of the 600,000. Thank you.
Councillor Horace Mitchell, please.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask officers how they define older. It's mentioned several times in the report, and it mentions the over 55s forum. I hope none of us regard people of the age of 55 or 56 as older. Somebody writing in the papers with specialist knowledge of this suggested yesterday that the word elderly is more appropriate because we're all older than somebody. My 9-year-old granddaughter's older than her sisters. And I just wonder what we mean by older. it occurs to me that reading the thing as a whole, that a very high preponderance of the people using these services are using them on the basis of bus passes, concessionary fares, it says, but I assume that means free. If they're not concessionary fares, that means that you pay less than other people. You pay nothing on a bus pass. And therefore, it would appear that a very high proportion of them are entitled to a bus pass. But then almost all my friends are coming to my age bracket and are entitled to a bus pass, but don't regard themselves elderly and hardly ever use their bus pass because we haven't got any buses in my neck of the woods. So I'm just wondering what you mean by older, and whether we can agree amongst ourselves in the council to start to use better language to this, and not, for example, to say the over 55s or the over 60s or something. Elderly, I think nowadays is at least 75 in most cases, as opposed to infirm, and some 14-year-olds are infirm, but they're not older.
Thank you, Chair. Members, perhaps I can clarify. I think we absolutely could have been clearer on what we were talking about. We're talking about the threshold of which someone is able to apply for a concessionary fare bus pass. So that's the age at which, and that's why there's so much data included in the report about the number of concessionary fare users, because it does make a difference in terms of the viability of the service.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gary Watts, please.
Thank you, Chair. Going on about the costs, this borough puts over £600,000 in. Could you give us a figure of how much the county actually puts into that service for the borough? And in the report, during the consultation, the services within South Ham at this particular time were generally marked as good. I wonder if we've got any plans to go back and do that survey, because we're actually cutting a service out of South Ham, which has got the highest population of elderly people within the borough, which is going to have a devastating effect on that community. I wonder if we've got any plans to go back and do that consultation again, because I think the results will be very different.
Chair, I might have missed the second part of your question, Councillor Watts, because I was trying to do maths in my head on the county council. On a quick and dirty math calculation, the county support equates to around 400,000.
So, well, we're a very laudable council, Chair, aren't we? We're working way beyond our pay grade. I mean, and we're looking after our residents. So I think it's very, I think that's a great thing this council is doing. And you look at the Whitchurch statistics there, everybody who uses that service are elderly. They're over 60, because 0.7%, I think it was, is unpaying fares. So the money is going towards the elderly, certainly in the rural areas.
Okay, Councillor Potter, please.
Thank you, Chair. Really just a question, I think, for Mark, probably, in terms of the survey which he's spoken about tonight. Could I just clarify, because obviously a number of things hinge around the answers that were received, I think, under the survey. Under paragraph 932, we talk about 89% of respondents rated bus services as satisfactory or higher, and yet elsewhere, when we talk about do existing services meet your needs, 55% of people say no, they don't. I know Mark, in his intro, talks about nearly half of people saying they do, but the fact is 55% say no, they don't meet our needs, and yet we have allegedly 89% of respondents saying that they rate the bus service as satisfactory or higher. I just find it difficult to square those two responses.
Councillor Potter, I know I'm not Mark. I can perhaps help with that one. In terms of customer satisfaction, that was asked about the existing services that they had. In terms of meeting needs, the fact that we had a significant number, over 1,000 of the 1,600 responses, talking about issues with evening services, that's why I can equate that the reduction in the meeting their needs comes from.
I mean, just as an aside to that, I mean, in terms of those who responded to the survey, and again, I know the numbers have been quoted, just remind me, I mean, was it a prerequisite that people had to be bus users anyway? I know there's some of this an academic exercise on behalf of the likes of Councillor Leake. He could have responded in a fairly academic way, I guess, really, as he hasn't been on the bus for some time. But
Councillor Potter, we tried to encompass as many people as widely as possible who might like to respond to the survey, because we were very aware that it's not just people that use the bus. We wanted to find out people that didn't use the bus and the reason why they didn't use the bus. So yes, it was available to customers not of any of the bus services, but there was also quite a large focus in terms of distributing leaflets, the on-the-bus surveys for those that might not be able to either fill out the form online or fill out the form in paper. So we tried to get a balance between both.
Thank you. If I could just ask if there's a specific point you want to refer to, could you refer to the report, for example, 10 of 77? It just enables us to be more accurate as to where we're referring to. Moving on to Councillor Gardner, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm talking about 11.11 on page 25 of 77, the expenditure of £600,000. And I agree with Councillor Gary Watts. This is a laudable piece of expenditure because it is actually looking at the more vulnerable of our residents, and I'm particularly keen on the rural areas where bus services tend to be pretty infrequent, and I would certainly be opposed to any total reduction and isolation of areas, because not everybody can find alternative transport or afford alternative transport. And when we talk about the use of the bus passes, a bus pass is absolutely useless if you haven't got a bus.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, it's really just to add to what Councillor Gardner said, and you know, in contravention of Councillor Leake's earlier remark, the reality, I think, is that if one's thinking about how one is going to subsidise buses and public transport and what is going to subsidise, what you are going to subsidise, the truth is that we've historically taken a pretty balanced approach. You know, we've subsidised some services on the basis of rurality and the fact that without subsidy you might have particular villages and hamlets in the borough, you know, completely outside of the public transport network. We've also, in a sense, subsidised services on the basis that they're used by older people, and sometimes they're older people and disabled people's sole practical means of transport. But the reality also is that we've subsidised bus services for the benefit of younger people as well, and indeed actually people on lower incomes, hence the you know, who are in work and who require bus services if they're working shifts you know, out of the sort of core hours of buses on a commercial basis. And I think it's entirely reasonable that we continue that balanced approach and actually, you know, seek to balance the needs of those different groups. You know, not least in the case of younger people, because I think there is an emerging issue in which we, you know, sometimes actually ignore the needs of younger people. Perhaps looking at it cynically because they happen not to be voters, but also perhaps that they're sort of underrepresented among our own membership as a council, and I think it's important that we continue to have a balanced approach that does meet the needs of the community as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Yes, if we've moved on to comments on the main report as opposed to questions, I just had a few things. I am a bus user, but I'm not a bus user in the borough. I'll come back to that in a second. Interestingly, I've had no representations of any kind at all from ward residents or any of my 6 parish councils, or indeed any organisation in the ward, so not from Neighbour Care or anybody of those kinds, or churches or anybody. That could mean, of course, that everybody in the ward has absolute trust in me to do the right thing and say the right thing on all occasions. It seems highly unlikely. it could mean that they've no idea this is going on, which again seems highly unlikely, given that we've handed out stuff on all the buses and had all these responses and had 10,000 leaflets put around the place wherever they went to. But presumably not entirely only to bus users, because I think that was the point Lisa made. Or perhaps people or perhaps they're not interested or not bothered, or perhaps they, on the whole, take the practical view that at the total cost per passenger, and that includes, of course, the cost of the bus pass, which is charged per trip and amalgamated together. So each of these trips is not only costing what we're paying for it, the £4, £7, £15, whatever. It's also costing its equivalent cost on the bus pass. And I suspect that people take the practical view that at that total cost per passenger, bus services in many rural areas, and I don't speak for the town, it has a different characteristic, are just simply not sustainable and not practical. I take the general view as a bus user that bus services only really work when they are frequent, cheap, and go where you want to go and bring you back. The second point being absolutely critical. If I came to this meeting by bus, it would take me about 3.5 hours to get here, and I'd have to book a hotel room because there's no way of getting back. There are no bus services in my area after 6. There are not many during the day anyway. So the bus is finished before this meeting starts. I take the view that where a scheduled bus service fails to meet the 3 tests, which are that there has to be frequent, cheap, and go where you want to go and bring you back. Where it fails to meet the 3 tests, it seems absolutely silly to me to try and run a scheduled bus service, because scheduled bus service in those cases don't work. And the general point that I want to make is that where there's a genuine case of need, which is affordable, and where the taxpayer can and decides that he can afford or she can afford to meet that need in some way or contribute towards it, I think we should only be considering alternatives to scheduled services, whether that's dial-a-ride or shared taxi services or neighbour care subsidised or other community services. I think the attempt to keep running scheduled services on the sort of basis on which most of these scheduled services are run, too infrequent, too short a day, not going to the right place at the right time, only going to one place wherever you wanted to go to, doesn't make sense. And in the interesting thing in the table that John was referring to, where we are spending more than the rest of everybody put together across the county, the next biggest, which is much smaller than us, is Eastleigh, and Eastleigh is much more urbanised borough. They have rural areas, but they're very few population. Something like 1/3 of our population is in rural areas, and theirs is much smaller. And you can run scheduled services in urbanised areas, no doubt about that. That's why they're so successful in places like Manchester and London, which is where I use the buses. So I really do think that trying to pretend to run a sensible scheduled service in areas where you can't do it with those 3 criteria makes no sense to me at all.
Members, it might be helpful just to very quickly do a run through. It was an early point Councillor Mitchell made about his parish council. In terms of the initial survey, and I'll just quickly whiz through this in terms of our consultation, it was done on the buses, supermarkets, Festival Place, Basingstoke Citizens Advice, Tadley Citizens Advice, Orchard Reception, our reception, the Dome, QMC Beacott, with our councillors, shops and pubs, doctor surgeries, the hospital, village halls, community centres, post office, parish councils and youth projects.
I wasn't suggesting we hadn't done it. What I'm saying is the result was nobody has spoken to me about it, nobody's raised an issue about it, and none of the parish councils, not just the residents.
Okay, my apologies to Councillor Mrs. James. I skipped past you.
Thank you. My first question is, in relation to this paper, this is on the rural service. Will we, when you present the urban bus service, present the methodology and the background with that findings? So we get an opportunity to discuss it against that? Or is this our only one chance to do that?
In terms of how we present the information, it will be done on a case study basis again. So all that background information, is that what you're after, Councillor James?
So what I'm asking, I suppose, is for the people that are going to come and speak in relation to the urban, we'll also have the pages, page 18, which is the background to page 50, not 50, sorry, page 29. So it will support, so they will also have an opportunity to discuss those survey findings against the urban area.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor James.
Thank you. I suppose picking up on what's been said tonight about the amount of money that we are funding and the county are not, I mean, it is laudable that we are. Is it not that we should be, looking at the shortfall from county and the ever decreasing pot of money that they're spending? Are we doing anything to do that?
Councillor James, what I think we need to do in terms of our pot is 600,000, but some of that are some of our community transport, our centre shuttle, that is nothing to do with the county. What I think we need to do is the work that shows how much money we put in and how much money the county put in on those services, because some quick maths in my head, the county put in more money than we do on those services, so they subsidise more than we do on those specific services, but we haven't. That's part of phase 2, because they're the services that we influence rather than have direct decision making over. So we will do all of that work when it comes back.
In relation to the findings and questions have been asked about the surveys, have you broken that down? We've raised this with you as a group before, in relation to who said what. So when we're seeing the information being fed back to us that says that whatever percentage we're satisfied with that service, who said that? Because I think when we asked you before, the majority of those were related to the rural service, so it influenced the outcome in relation to the urban.
So, Councillor James, that significant document that we sent out before Christmas, that had all of the survey results for all of the services, so it's broken down service by service. So in terms of if you wanted to have a look at one of the urban services, you could look at that and compare it to the rural services. So all of that information was there. If you're saying that there was something missing that you want from that, come back to us. But as far as I was concerned, I appreciate it was 150 pages, but that was all the detail that we had.
Sorry, but what I'm saying is we're giving an overview here of the bus service, and we're saying that most people are satisfied. But what we did, we asked people from the taxi service to all of these different services to fill in the questionnaire, and we've sort of lumped them all together to say that people are generally satisfied. Is that a good methodology? And does that give us a true picture of how people feel about the bus service?
I think in the amount of space that we had and in the representations we could make, that yes, there was that overall picture, because actually the overall satisfaction picture of 3 or 4 or 5 was actually quite high, and probably higher than we expected from what we hear and dealing with residents. But you must bear in mind that we probably deal with the residents that are complaining. So yes, we wanted to put that overall mark in, but certainly when we look at phase 2 and we are looking at each of the individual larger services rather than some of these smaller kind of routes, that's where we will break down that survey information and go into more detail. Obviously in these papers we've gone into a bit more detail about the survey responses. We'll do that again for each of the JAS 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s.
I think it's essential you do that, because I don't think you can one size all fits all, and even I would have concerns. I'm not a rural member, but I would have concerns looking at these 4 services and giving an overall saying that everyone's satisfied. I would have wanted to see a survey relating to each one of those services, and are they satisfied? I think it's not good practice, I don't think, to do it as an overall, because you're not really getting a true picture. If you truly want to reflect on are our customers satisfied, is the community bus as satisfied as the service 21-24? And so I think, if I was a rural member, I would want to see that. The other question that I wanted to ask is around young people. You make reference in the report to young people, and I can't find it here, but my understanding of the survey of young people is they were, the reason they're not using the bus service is around cost and also that it wasn't meeting their needs, and they were very unhappy. And that was the highest thing that came up in the young person survey, and that's not reflected in this report, in a sense, and that concerns me because it was such a significant finding in that survey.
Councillor James, if I pick up your second point and then I'll pass to Mark over to the first point. So in terms of the younger people, that's certainly evidence that came out to us through the strategic needs assessment and access to public transport, the commissioning outcome group that I think starts in April on that one. There is a big focus on the younger people within that commissioning outcome group. In terms of the report you've got in front of you this evening, you will see the absolute vast majority of concessionary fare users on these on the 3 case studies. So absolutely, there's not running through this report the issues with younger people. In terms of an update generally for members on where we are with this, the portfolio holder and my team have been working very hard with Stagecoach. We're trying to secure a national pilot for reduced fares for 16 to 21-year-olds, because you hit 16 and you pay an adult fare. And this is part of the problems that we're hearing back from the youth survey, etc. We've got, is it Baroness Kramer and Maria Miller are absolutely on board in trying to secure that for Basingstoke. It's about Stagecoach committing to it. It seems like if they do it, it's going to happen in Basingstoke, which is fantastic news. And we're just working on that now with them to try and get that secured and implemented as soon as possible.
Thank you. Just to pick up on your first point, if I can, Councillor James, in terms of, which I think you were looking at service-specific satisfaction information in terms of the report, I think which is what you were saying. Just to pick it out, we have covered that in the report, Appendix A. For example, my page 19, which is your page 34, for example, you'll see the bullet-pointed elements just above 14.5 for that service, which is the Whitchurch Community Bus, for an example. That's the all respondents rated overall satisfaction of that service as 4 out of 5, but there were some issues relating to bus stops. So what I'm saying is, for each of these case studies here, and for each of the case studies in the future report for the jazz type services, we have done and we will continue to draw out those individual satisfaction levels. But you're right, the headline, if you like, that I mentioned in the start of my presentation was across the board, just to give a general reminder, if you like, about what residents felt as across the board. But we haven't sort of pulled on that fact too much. We've done it more on a case by case basis. Does that answer your question?
I suppose what I would have liked to have seen in the presentation is a focus on those services, talking about, and what I'd like to see in the urban one is a focus on the service relating to that, and talking us through, and when you look at that Whitchurch one, then there's some clear issues that we need to address, and you know, I would want to know what we're going to do. The other question I have is, are we, and I don't know if they're affected by this, the changes that are being made in relation to public transport at the moment that are just coming into effect, are they being factored into this, or have they been factored in? Obviously they've happened, they're only just happening, so I don't know whether they are.
Councillor James, in terms of your first point, we'll take that on board for the presentation when we come back again. We thought all the information was in the report. The report's very full, it's very lengthy, it is there, but perhaps we need to draw out other bits and highlight perhaps those sections to members more clearly. In terms of the recent changes that are made, we did have a look at those and see how they affected these services tonight. I actually think that they are more relevant to phase 2 than they are to phase 1.
Just looking at one that you pointed out, and it maybe is, you know, and I'd quite like to ask a question around bus stops. That's an interesting issue that's just picked up there. It says that 2 out or 3 out of the 5 highlighted dissatisfaction with this issue. And are we picking up the issue? Because I know that isn't just a rural issue. For us in the urban area, that's a real considerable issue. And how's that coming out of the report, and what are we going to do about bus stops?
Thank you. If I can just come back on that one individually in terms of Whitchurch. You may not have picked up the detail, particularly on the maps, but again, they're outside. The revisions to the Whitchurch approach is twofold, if you like. One is the connection, if that's the right word, with a commercial service connecting to the towns, which will help reduce the subsidy for the parts that the Borough Council pick up. But in addition to that, and in relation to that comment about bus stops, which related to basically there not being enough stops, if you like, on the circular within that existing route, that's taken into account by the extension within the circular of that route, if that answers your question directly. But we are trying to pick up those on a case-by-case basis. Although it's a proposed solution, if you like, in terms of the detail, we'd look to, if that is supported, discuss that a bit further with the likes of Whitchurch Town Council and the surrounding parishes to get them on board to get the detail right as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on, and we've got two more questions, stroke comments, and then we can move on. So, Councillor Mrs. Reid.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to a couple of earlier points, actually, I'd just like to echo some of the things already said about the fact that it's extremely laudable, I think, that as a council we do support transport systems, and by doing so we are supporting some of our more vulnerable residents, and we're enabling them to access essential services and supporting the economy to some extent as well. But if I can go back to Councillor Gary Watt's question about the survey, as I'm not sure whether he asked whether there was a chance of redoing the survey in the light of the changes to bus services now. I'm not sure whether there was a specific answer to that. Certainly, as a councillor, this is the largest postbag I've had in all my time as councillor on general dissatisfaction with the changes to the bus routes, and it's affecting my residents across the board and across the generations. So I think it would be an interesting exercise to do some kind of survey now in the light of that. And I think that also illustrates why it's important that we do have some kind of stake in the provision of bus services.
Councillor Mrs. Reid, totally hear what you're saying with that. The difficulty with the changes that have been made by Stagecoach now are they are their commercial daytime routes, and our subsidy, particularly in the town, tends to relate to between about 5 and 7 p.m. So that is where our subsidy lies. It's not within in the daytime routes. And in terms of the subsidies that we're talking about, the routes for this evening, they're not affected by the major changes from Stagecoach's amendments to their timetable currently. Indeed, in terms of the process that we went through, we obviously went out for public consultation initially, and then we went out for public consultation in terms of options that are available. I think perhaps with phase 2, we're having early conversations about whether we hold focus groups and have that sort of approach, because it's a lot more people when you're talking about the phase 2 routes of, some of the jazz routes. There's a lot more users, so we're trying to put in something into place that's much more practical, but indeed it is taking into account service users and non-service users.
Thank you. If I could move on to Councillor Mrs. Tucker, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether this is quite the right time to say things, but I'm going to say it because I need to get it off my chest. In the 154, which is basically on page 53, refers to Stratfield Say, which of course is one of the villages that I represent. We've heard tonight that Berkshire will no longer be subsidising in any way, shape or form. When I started looking after Stratfield Say, they didn't have anything. They had no bus whatsoever. They couldn't get to Basingstoke and we couldn't help. So they were absolutely thrilled to hear about Berkshire, who were going to be kind enough to send their bus down a little bit further. Okay, we were paying for it, but at least they had some kind of access to shops. A village like Stratfield Say has a lot of elderly people, and in the report you will see that they don't really have much of an option of having dial-a-ride, because by the time the dial-a-ride gets round from Tadley, it's practically full then, and it's completely full by the time it gets to Stratfield Say. So if you're disabled in any way, shape or form, or even just elderly and not able to get onto anything else, you haven't an option. So as an aside, I would also like to mention that I think we should be looking after particularly dial-a-ride and helping to subsidise them in some way, shape or form, because talking to them, they're such a wonderful organisation, but they are so stretched, it's very, very difficult for them to help the people And as we know, we're all getting older, and the numbers of us older ones is going up. So from that point of view, the suggestion is that there is this roundabout route that is intriguing, but it doesn't give us any idea as to how long it would take to go around this route, even which direction it's going to go. So whether it's actually a feasible option from that point of view, I have no idea. And I think Mark can't help me on that, can you?
Well, just to come back on some of that, the route is very much something we've been discussing through some soft market testing in terms of the sort of viability of bringing those services together. So, in terms of the details of which which way it runs and on those bit details, it was more of a in principle view that we're looking to get some support for. Just to pick up on the dial-a-ride element, it's also part of the services that we generically fund at the Borough Council. Just for information, we put in somewhere in the region of about £130,000 a year. It's either the largest or the second largest dial-a-ride scheme in the entire county, and the county matches 50-50 in terms of the funding that we put in there, just for information.
If I may just continue, what I'd like to say is where Stratfield Say are concerned, they are incredibly nervous that they're now not going to have any kind of bus at all if they don't accept what is being suggested for them at the moment. But as we've heard, Berkshire are pulling out, so therefore they won't have anything. So if something is started, what they have said, if you're reading the report, they're frightened that even that will be changed again and they won't have anything at all. On the case study 4 of the late night, I've had quite a lot to do with late night buses from when I was representing Tadley from Hampshire, and there really is a tremendous need for the Friday and Saturday, and it's not just young people, it's older people as well. It's the young people's work and study and entertainment, but it's the older people, middle-aged and older people, who want entertainment, like going to the cinema, going to the Anvil, going to the theatre. They can't get back if they can get there. It means a taxi, which is incredibly expensive. And just for your information, I did have proof. One gentleman, bless him, travelled for a fortnight in the evenings. He went from Tadley to Basingstoke and came back on the different buses each night, and he actually did a report as to the number of people who were on the buses, and Fridays and Saturdays, believe me, are needed. And that was when they had a bus. Of course, they haven't got a bus at all now, so it's a shame. So I would support wholeheartedly the option 2 with regard to, no, sorry, that's the circular route, case study 4 for the late evenings, Jazz 2.
Councillor Mrs Tucker, there's one point that might help in terms of the Stratfield Say and the circular route. What we're trying to do is not be too prescriptive about what a service provider might want to do in terms of a route or frequency or time it might take, because if we're very prescriptive to them, they might actually, they're the ones with the on the ground expertise, they're the one that run these services, they might know better than us the best route to go around, the routes where they pick up more people, and what we're trying to do is, this is an option that they say has worked, we've worked that up with them about the possible route. What we don't want to do now is to say, okay, we'll go for that, but we need it to be this, and this. The only thing we will say is it needs to pick up the residents of Stratfield Say, it needs to pick up the 2 taxi shares that are existing, and in terms of which way round it would go, that's probably something that's best left to them.
Sorry, can I just come back on that? It's obviously very difficult for people to comment on when you're consulted and given this route. All they see is what we're giving them, and therefore they're going to say, like me, well, how long does it take? How often, when, why, etc. So it's very difficult for them to comment sensibly. And just a little plea, Mortimer West End still haven't got any kind of bus service at all.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take one last question stroke comment from Councillor James. and this is up to page 32, because I'm keen that we get onto the case studies and start discussing the main crux of each of those. So, Councillor James, thank you.
I just wanted to ask about on page 14, about in relation to corporate implications and financial. It's about the evening service pilot. What it says is that we had a pilot for 9 months, and it was in the region of 22k. And it talks about how else we can fund that. I just would like you to talk through for me and what the pilot was and where we're going to go with that evening service in the future, and how we intend to fund it, or are we not going to be able to fund it? Because obviously the key issue in the urban area is the lack of any evening service, and my concern...
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Could I ask you to park that one, and we'll ask it in case study 4, because it sounds very specific. I know it's in the pages you're talking about, but perhaps we could have that in case study 4.
Okay.
The reason I say that is because I want the officers to make sure they capture your comments during that case study to make sure they don't get lost.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I think we're just going to summarise the general view on the part of the report we've looked at so far.
Only two things, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I felt there was a mixed view on the level of subsidy funding. Although this is laudable, others felt that this should be reduced down to a level more similar to that of other councils. There was quite a mixed view on that. And the only other thing was that the need to make sure that the services meet needs, in particular for older people and younger people from the borough.
Microphone, please, sorry.
I wouldn't say it was a mixed view. I'd say it was a majority view. We thought it was laudable. There's one council, maybe two, that thought we should reduce that level.
I'll accept that, provided my minority view and possibly that of Councillor Mitchell is recorded as well.
Yeah,
it is absolutely vital that we cut this cost, otherwise this council will not be able to continue as it is.
If I could just check the committee's view on dial-a-ride, because when the point was made by Councillor Mrs Tucker, there was a few nods of head. But I just wanted to make sure if there was an interest in perhaps some of the funding that we're currently putting was to go to dial-a-ride, would be of interest as an alternative method to suit people's needs. Councillor Mitchell.
Well, I did, in a sense, suggest that when I made an earlier statement, in that if a bus service can't be frequent and regular and take you where you want to go and bring you back, you're better off not to try and have a schedule. I didn't explicitly say that I wanted to see the amount of money provided reduced, but I do think the money we're providing is not being currently very well spent, which is the whole point of having this exercise. I certainly don't want to see it increase, because I don't think there's a lot of merit in increasing it. And when we talk, there's a lot of, everybody talks about older people, you know, and I did ask this question at the beginning. The great majority of older people up to about the age of 75 or beyond are self-sufficient, the great majority. Now, there are pockets in the borough, including in my ward, of higher levels of deprivation, where there are pockets of significant numbers of people of all ages, I have to say, not just older people, who are deprived in some way and need help. But this constant use of the word older people, as if all older people need a bus service, is complete nonsense. And the people that I come to the theatre here with, 4 of us use one car to get to the theatre or to the Anvil from the farther reaches of the borough. The idea that if you suddenly laid on a night service, people from where I live are going to suddenly go to the Haymarket is nonsense, because they actually go to the theatre and the cinema and concerts in Newbury, which is only 4 miles away. So you mustn't, all this hosing down thing of we must do this for the older people and the younger people, and the same is true of younger people as well. Younger people in my area go to Newbury, they don't want to go to Basingstoke. Why would they spend an hour and a half on a bus going to Basingstoke when it's only 4 miles into Newbury? Makes no sense at all. Similarly, other parts of the ward, people in St Maryborn might actually want to go to Andover rather than going to Whitchurch or going to Newbury or to going to Basingstoke. So I really do think this is very much a case-by-case basis, and the idea that all older people, you know, because they're older, need help is complete nonsense, and we should stop pretending that it's anything other than that. People who need help, whatever age they are. Disabled need help, whatever age they are. Vulnerable people need help, whatever age they are. 90-year-old people I know are perfectly self-sufficient, still driving around as a danger to the public despite the best efforts of the Department of Transport.
Okay, I have Councillors Gardner, Councillor Keith Watts and Councillor James had their hands raised. Councillor Gardner.
To some extent, I will agree with Horace on that one, that there are people out there that do need transport, haven't got it, and do feel incredibly isolated. And a lot of them are elderly. Now, whether we actually move funds across to an enterprise such as Dial-A-Ride, or we actually look at actually providing more money to make sure that Dial-A-Ride can provide an adequate service to those areas that need it, is another matter for the portfolio holder to look at. But certainly, if there is no adequate bus service, then Dial-A-Ride is an option, and we should look to see how that can be provided. But one of the things that hasn't been touched on is that we have a local plan going through, which has talked incredibly about mitigation on transport into the borough and the increased use of public transport. And you're not going to increase the use of public transport by taking buses off.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Watts.
So, Chairman, I was merely going to suggest that when we do case studies, we begin with Stratford Say, because Councillor Tucker's already got us going on it. And I have some things to say.
Councillor Mrs. James.
It was purely to say that, I don't think that we can just sort of suddenly say West Berkshire pause its funding, therefore we're going to deliver a different service. I'm not sure that that's what we should be doing tonight and coming up with an option in that sense. So I think it may be an issue, but whether we should then say this is what we're going to do. I think part of this review maybe is another piece of work, but we mustn't just suddenly say, right, okay, this service has been withdrawn, we're going to fill that gap. I don't think that's what we should be doing here tonight.
And finally, Councillor John Leake, and then I will, I'm not precious, so we can move on to Stratford Say.
Sorry. I support what Councillor Mrs. Tucker's actually said. I did say that I was generally opposed to subsidy, but I did specifically say that except for the elderly and the infirm, and either the taxi service or Dial-A-Ride, and I think we should be actually looking at ways that we can move some of the general subsidy into more specific subsidies such as Dial-A-Ride, so I support Councillor Mrs. Tucker.
I was just going to fuse the two together and just say the majority of viewers that the level of subsidy was laudable and should meet needs, in brackets in particular, elderly people or older people and young people, which is what the view seems to be across the floor.
Chairman, was my minority view recorded, please?
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the Stratford Say paper now. Is this on the next one I'm coming to on Stratford Say, yes? Okay. Which is page 49, that will start from. And I will open the questions with Councillor Keith Watts.
Thank you, Chairman. Paragraph 1618 it says here, although I haven't found it. Would the officers confirm that none of the options consulted on allowed for people from Stratford Say to continue to go into Reading?
Yes, absolutely. That's correct.
When we were in discussion, I have something to say about that. And the comment was made and recorded by ward councillor about Mortimer West End. Was any consideration given to including Mortimer West End in a route?
The predominance of this review was to look at the services and the routes that we subsidise currently. Obviously, there are, I think has been alluded to earlier tonight, obviously large parts of the borough that haven't currently got a bus service at all. So on that basis, no, it wasn't.
And I see that Wokingham are waiting to know what we're doing, but it's possible to get from Stratford, say, to Reading without going through West Berkshire, go through Wokingham District. Have we had any discussions with the Wokingham District about alternative routes?
No, that's not something we've had at this point in time. Obviously, we've only heard very recently confirmation in terms of West Berkshire's position. But in terms of how the review has looked at that service, obviously the value for money, if you like, aspect and the efficiency would reduce if we were to take a greater share of the existing service, if that's the line that you were looking at.
Yes, I'd like to comment that where there's a cost-benefit issue, which is what we have here, it isn't only necessarily look at reducing the costs, but increasing the benefits. And I don't think it matters to us if the bus is being occupied and paid for by people from Wokingham or Basingstoke-and-Deane, as long as the Basingstoke-and-Deane people are getting a service. I believe that people should be given the option to go to Reading. In fact, I mean, this report refers many, many times to the fact that it's out of the borough, but that's perfectly accepted, and quite rightly so, with the other service that's taking people to Newbury. And I don't know what they should have said there. I've had a look. Mortimer West End's in a difficult place in this borough because it sticks out farther north than anything else. But what harm would it do if the bus went through Mortimer as well, even if it is in West Berkshire? And I very much understand the view of Stratfield Say Parish Council that if the route is otherwise going through places that have got a service, then they don't have great confidence that theirs will continue. And it should be possible for us to plot a route in Basingstoke-and-Deane that picks up a number of villages and communities that haven't got a service, who will be all in it together with Stratfield Say. So I don't feel that we've done a very good job for the Stratfield Say people, but perhaps that's because at the first meeting of the working group we were told it wasn't in the borough.
Just to come back on that one, you're absolutely right about that final point. When we did find out that the county council's information team, who actually produced that, had got the information correct, which is why we were under that impression for some time.
Thank you, Matt. Moving on with the questions to Councillor Mitchell.
Chairman, I thought we were in discussion.
But it started with questions.
Councillor Mrs. Tucker gave us a long discussion, and I thought we were moving on from that. But if there are questions, I'll wait and hear all the exciting questions.
If there is any questions. I'll confirm. I mean, I said if there's no questions, we can move on to comments. I had Councillor Leake and Councillor Gardner. If you have questions, or were they more comments? Okay, we'll take comments. Councillor Mitchell.
I'd rather assume that. I'm with the Whitchurch contingency, who's very keen for some of my residents to be taken into Whitchurch on a better basis or something. And I agree with Keith that services need to go where people need or wish to go. And if that's a place outside the borough, and the cost of doing that is commensurate with the cost of bringing them to Basingstoke, but they regard that other place as their local town, service makes no sense to anybody if it doesn't go where they want to go. So sort of artificially causing the service to focus on Basingstoke when that's not appropriate. I don't know, because I don't talk to a lot of people who live in Stratfield Say. So I'm just saying, as the general principle, the focus should be where is it that people regard as their place to shop and do their leisure activities. and in large rural parts of the borough, that is not Basingstoke. I don't want to artificially bring people into Basingstoke for the benefit of the economy of Basingstoke if their preference is to go to Reading or Newbury or Andover or some other place, Winchester or somewhere. That's not what we're here for from the residents' point of view. But the other factor which Marilyn raised is this journey time. And as we start to divert things into other places, I mean, there was this circular route. And journey time is critically important, because if I'm a vulnerable person who hasn't got my own mode of transport and need to get to somewhere, I need to get somewhere to do something, to shop, to visit my grandchildren, or whatever it might be, the reason I go to that place. And I need time when I get there, and I then need to get back. And if we add an hour and a half at the beginning and end of the day, the very people that we're trying to help are stressed out by spending an hour and a half each way in a bus. That is a very long time to spend in a bus or a dial a ride or whatever it might be. So I really do think that officers, when they're looking at the practicalities of things, should take very careful attention on journey time. And if it's a circular route, one way of dealing with it is to have a bus start, two buses start concurrently and go the opposite way around the route, in which case it'll optimize itself for most of the people on the route, except those on the very periphery, for whom it's probably not much good anyway because it takes too long.
Thank you. Councillor Leake.
Yes, I want to make a similar point. I mean, I regularly visit Stratfield Say Village Hall because I play bridge there every Tuesday evening unless I'm dragged here for some council or other committee meeting. And I live on the most westerly point of this map, almost anyway, and Stratfield Say is on the most easterly. And it takes me in a car, without stopping at any bus stops, over 20 minutes. And if you, and we take the direct route, I just don't see this working. It's too big, and I would suggest that officers should be looking at two possibilities. One is a sort of an easterly route, which would probably follow that set out on this paper until it got to Bramley, and then it could go down Vine Road into Sherburn St John and directly to the hospital, because that is what many people want to do, and certainly on Sundays, because Hants Dock is also very convenient on Sundays if you have a little problem. And then there should be another one possibly for those on the western side. And I have to say, again, I think the emphasis could be on Tadley, because actually Sainsbury's in Tadley is quite a social gathering place. I mean, you never fail to meet somebody you know there, and most people actually, whether it's Mrs. Ossington's ward, I meet people from Kingsclere in Sainsbury's in Tadley. I don't go very often. My wife goes more frequently. I do also go to Morrison's, but my wife prefers Sainsbury's. But I do tell you that an awful lot of people from that area actually use Tadley rather than the town, and it's more convenient. And I am suggesting that if this is to be pursued, we do look at the possibility of an eastern route and a western route. I just think that one large route just will not work. You will be on the bus for so long that by the time you get to your destination, it'll be time to come back. Thank you very much.
Did you want to comment? If I could just invite Councillor Tucker, I think he wants to add to your point.
Sorry, I think the problem is that this is being done slightly in isolation, because there are buses that go from Tadley and down to Bramley and then in, but it's not this thing. So I think it is a bit of a problem, because we might be talking about things that actually are being covered by other things, because the beauty of it is that the bus that goes through Pamber Heath now actually goes to Sainsbury's in Tadley and back again, and everybody's really absolutely delighted. So, you know, Yeah, I think we need to double check that one.
Forgive me for my lack of knowledge, but I did say I don't use the buses, so I'm afraid I don't know where they go. But I mean, if you look at this particular little plan, the elderly in Sherburne St John actually live largely in Vidler's Farm or Dancers Meadow, which is the eastern side, and some of the buses, the Jazz 2, doesn't actually stop in the village. They do it sometimes, but not on Sundays or whatever. So that would help them as well. So I just, I do think it needs to be looked at again to try and work out how people can get to any of their destinations in a reasonable time.
On a point of order, Chairman, I was a bit surprised by some of the things that Councillor Leake was saying. Can we just test that neither he nor his wife has shares in Sainsbury's?
I'm afraid we do. I'm sorry.
Got it.
And Tesco.
Right.
Thank
most
you.
other
If I could
companies.
move on to, is there no comments from the officers on that point? Move to okay. No, oh yeah, good point. We're on to Councillor Gardner, please.
Thank you. I'll agree with Councillor Leake that that just once in a while that the route as shown is very long, and if it does go clockwise or anti-clockwise, then you are going to spend an awful lot of your day on that bus. And to talk in terms of an east option and a west option would make sense to me. Whether it goes via Tadley or goes via Chinham is another matter. Chinham's got a very good shopping centre, and no, I don't have shares in Tesco. But the current service to Reading is very sparsely used, and I suspect the main reason for that is that people don't actually want to go to Reading. They go to Reading because they've got no alternative. This alternative does at least say there's a Basingstoke centre to it. I suspect that may well be more popular and would therefore have an increased use. The subsidy going through to Reading is very high. I think we can certainly look to cut that, but I just don't believe that the Reading option as it stands is viable, and it shouldn't be pursued.
To the portfolio holder.
Can I just say, interject there and say that the time from Reading, from Stratfield Say to Reading is 45 minutes, and the time from Stratfield Say to Basingstoke will be 45 minutes. So it's equidistant in time, if that's what you were getting at before.
How long does it take to get back if the route takes you to the west before it gets back?
And I'm just you off. Am I on? It's just that if you had a straight route that just went straight down, you're talking about the time, equidistance. If we didn't go around the houses and we came straight down, it would be a 45-minute journey.
If we could have a straight route, then everybody would be delighted, but we're not talking about a straight route. We are talking about round the houses, which is going to be a much longer exercise, and it's not even a straight route from Stratfield Say to Reading now.
Okay, thank you. So there appears to be no more hands up for this one. So if I can ask the officer to summarise your comments.
Two main comments. First one, services should be focused on the destination where people want to shop, even if this happens to be outside the borough. The other point I had was on the circular route. This should be looked at again to provide more details. At the moment, it appears to be very long, and consideration could be made of an eastern or western route, or both.
Okay, that seems to be generally agreed. But I take that because I was looking at the nods from the heads, and there was more nods than shakes. I saw. I'm relatively happy with the nods. I know that you've necessarily disagreed, but I noticed most of the nods that we need to look at that understand the length of the journey and perhaps consider an east to west.
We've got a limited amount of money. It talks about it in the report, and there's going to be a deficit. And I'm not so sure that we should be funding services that go out of the borough with a limited budget. I can't personally support that we're going to be supporting a service to go to Reading.
I don't think we are. I think what we're saying is that the route itself needs to be looked at. There was concern around the time of the journey going around in a circle. Perhaps there's an east to west. And if, for example, it goes past or through Mortimer, if that's somewhere where people want to go, then it necessarily shouldn't be ruled out if it makes a good bus service. Is that roughly?
Chairman, I'd quite like to understand what the objection is to having a service going outside the borough.
We're using taxpayers' money subsidising routes to go outside the borough. I mean, we've got example tonight of West Berkshire Council cutting their budget for coming into Basingstoke. I mean, we have it both sides. I just think we've got limited resources. We should be concentrating and moving within the borough. And if we have to go to Newbury or Reading, we should be getting cross subsidies from those particular areas as well. So we need a holistic look at all this.
If I could just invite Councillor Keith Watts in.
This is a very important principle and probably the most important thing we're going to talk about tonight. I read the peer review report, the first time I've seen anything of it yesterday, and it does say at one point that we should stop messing about with all these other things and concentrate on what we're supposed to do, providing services to residents. And the bus subsidies are about services to residents and where the residents want to go and need to go. Obviously, it's of great importance to me because my ward is in the far southwest and our local shopping town is Andover, and the fast routes go to Winchester. It's very important to people in the northwest, and although there's not the density population, I thought we should have at least given the people in the northeast the chance to say that they want to go to Reading. But a member of our working group got embarrassed. I reminded him that he was opposing money being taken out of the borough to be spent in another borough. That completely misses the point of why we're here. We're here to serve those residents. And if the obvious and natural place for them to go to want to shop, or the pharmacists, or the library, or the pubs, then we should be supporting them.
Councillor Mitchell.
I asked the question because I thought there might be some rational explanation for the rooted objection, which seemed to me without merit at all. What that means for one of these case studies in my ward is that we would be saying, well, you must stop that because it takes people outside the borough to do whatever they're doing on a route that's 5 miles from the place concerned, and actually, instead of doing that, bring them 20 miles down here to Basingstoke. How anybody can possibly explain the rationale for that? Of course, the effect of that would be there'd be nobody on the bus because they didn't want to come here. They don't go to Basingstoke and they've no desire to do so, and therefore it would get cut. So the net result of this extraordinary posture of not subsidising people to go outside the borough is that people who live on the periphery of the borough should not have any services of any kind whatsoever. And if that's coming from people who represent town wards with, on the whole, much better bus services than any of us are going to see in our lifetimes outside of the town, I think it's an outrage. And I'd like to hope that the people would think again about this rather extraordinary proposition.
Councillor Gardner, please.
If we can just get back to specifics. The average passenger numbers per trip from Stratfield Say to Reading on a Saturday is 3, and on a Thursday is 8. Now that doesn't sound to me as if there are masses and masses of people who wants to go to Reading, and we are subsidising that service. We do not provide a service to Basingstoke, which is probably where people would prefer to go anyway. So I can't see any point in increasing the subsidy for those few people that do want to go to Reading at the expense of the people that want to go to Basingstoke.
Councillor Potter.
I mean, Councillor Gardner makes the point I was going to make, but in addition, I mean, I don't see it in the way Councillor Mitchell does as this outrage. It's simple, I would have thought, in its thesis, isn't it, really? If the economic well-being of Reading is improved, or Andover is improved by the influx of these people on the periphery as we talk about it, then those are the towns that ought to provide the subsidy, and it is their councils that ought to provide that subsidy to provide a service for them to come into those towns and spend their money and improve the well-being of Andover and Reading. It isn't for us to do that. If we're concentrating the money that Basingstoke and Dean, council taxpayers and others pay for this, concentrate on the well-being of Basingstoke and Dean. It's a simple premise, isn't it? I would have thought no more than that.
Thank you. We're just finished with Councillor Keith Watts.
Well, can I say that there are council taxpayers in Whitchurch, some of us, and it's not our fault that we have such mad boundaries that we're stuck with being in Basingstoke and Dean. But as we pay our council tax, we're entitled to be represented by the council, which has a duty, as the peer review says, to provide services to residents.
The residents in, because I wasn't making any suggestion we should send people to Reading. I said what my point was, that people should have support to go where it's natural for them to go to and where they wish to go, if they have any support at all. I'm very pleased to hear that some members of other parties are against having any subsidies for any of my residents to have any buses to where they want to go, in which case they don't stand for election locally. But my point was a general one. And I didn't hear an answer to my point, which is that if we removed a small subsidy that takes people where they want to go 5 miles away, they won't have any service at all. Is that exactly what we're advocating? That because you live near the edge of the borough, you should have no support unless you get on a bus and come an hour and a half into Basingstoke? Is that really the suggestion that members are making? It just seems farcical to me. And it's nothing to do with supporting anyone's economy. If we think about it, the people who are taking these services are vulnerable people. We keep referring to them as elderly. They need help. They need support. Is their contribution to the economy of Newbury going to make an enormous difference to West Berkshire? What absolute nonsense. Is bringing them in here at enormous expense to the centre of Basingstoke going to make any contribution to the future and well-being of Basingstoke? No chance whatever. Absolute nonsense.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to ask the officer to somehow wrap up the comments. There's obviously a mixed view that's that people would like services to go where they want them to go. What I was going to say was something along the lines of where these should be focused will depend upon the location in the borough, and different parts of the borough will look either in or out. You know, some places will look outside and some will look inside, and I've got to think of some words to make that work so that it covers both sides of the argument, if you like. But I suppose for the rural wards, you're talking about focusing it on the destination which is most appropriate to that location, and for perhaps the more in-town wards, a focus on Basingstoke. This probably falls more into a general comment than it does under the Stratfield Say point. So if you're content, members, we'll word something along those lines. Okay, so if we can move now on to case study 1, which will be Whitchurch Community Bus, and that's page 33 through to 39. We'll open with questions, and I saw Councillor Keith Watt's hand.
Can I point out that this service at the moment doesn't serve my ward at all? I could identify, there's one cottage called Clap Gates where the residents could possibly want to use this service. It brings in healthy people from Councillor Mitchell's ward who use the pubs in Whitchurch, and some elderly, frail people from Councillor Mrs. Baker's ward. But this proposal is different, and I'll come on to that. Questions? Could the officers confirm that the consultation and all our discussions were based on an inaccurate map for this route?
I can clarify that the original map that was used for the consultation was about 200 metres short in terms of the entire route, and that was based on it was using the map that the actual provider has published, and as you kindly brought to our attention, we had lost a very small element of that entire route, which we've put back on the maps that you can see with you tonight.
Yeah, so it's another case among many of this council not having any records of what it's contracted in the past. But that is absolutely vital, because the reason it goes along the B3400, which puzzled me, is to get there, and it's Leverstoke Lane, and there are some elderly residents down the end of that bit of the route. I found this out because I went to the annual general meeting of the Kingfisher Day Centre in Leverstoke. And since then, because my name's appeared in the newspaper, I've had a phone call from people down there asking me please to save the route. Well, I'm glad to say that it is now back on, but if we're basing our judgments on these things, then we need to be very careful to make sure that we've got accurate data. Now, my key point and my key concern about this, well, can I say incidentally that these are, I'm coming on to questions. The proposed change proposed by Whitchurch Town Council will benefit my residents, and I think we bear in mind that if we can increase the benefit, then the cost-benefit ratio gets much better. I think that will substantially increase the benefit. But my whole doubt about this is the feasibility of this proposed commercial, well, up there it refers to a linked commercial routes. Throughout the report, and I'm referring particularly to 14.8.3 on page 35 of 77, it talks about extending the service on a commercial basis. Now, there seems to be a distinction there, a link to commercial routes or extension. The rest of my questions are based on that in the report, the extension, which comes in several times. Is the recommendation that this route will not continue if that commercial extension is not feasible?
Just for total clarity, the proposal that's put forward, and that's based on soft market testing in terms of looking at what both the current provider and taxi share companies have said, is that the existing route that exists at the moment is not particularly viable because it doesn't actually serve sufficient numbers of residential areas within Whitchurch. So the proposal goes to extend, so it covers the exact same route that we've got currently, plus more within the Whitchurch area, as is outlined on the map. That's the part that the Borough Council will subsidise. And in those discussions, it was determined that if we allowed, if you like, a provider to provide that link between Whitchurch and Basingstoke on one side and Whitchurch and Andover on the other side, they would make sufficient income, if you like, for those commercial aspects either side to reduce the actual cost of the element that we'd subsidise. So the net effect, if you will, is that there's more coverage than the existing route, more opportunity to get to other towns, and the element that with the Borough Council funds actually reducing in cost. Hope that clarifies.
Thank you. So it's suggested that this operator will be operating in competition with Stagecoach.
Obviously, the whole exercise will be subject to procurement, so we have no idea who the new operator would be of that service. But yes, there's an element of the route there that is used at the same route that other services use, which I think is the 74 and 76.
So 76 and 86. So will that need a licence from the traffic commissioners?
Sorry, I didn't catch your question there.
Will that need a licence from the traffic commissioners?
Yeah, Councillor Watts, any route that is registered will need to go to the traffic commissioner with, I think, from memory, 56 days notice.
And how are Stagecoach going to react if we're going to ask Basingstoke Community Transport to compete with them?
We'd have to ask Stagecoach, Councillor Watts, how they would react to that. Essentially, we're not asking community transport to take this on. What we're saying is soft market testing. We have approached several service providers about what can work and what not. They all told us that at the moment we're paying for dead mileage from Basingstoke to Whitchurch to get our vehicle there, and this gets over that. So that's an option that's been put on the table, and it would have to go through the proper processes. Who's to say Stagecoach wouldn't procure for the service in the first place?
Well, I think it unlikely that Stagecoach are going to run double-decker buses to Dunley and Lower Woodcut, or indeed be able to turn round in Leverstoke Lane outside Florence Portal Close. The fact is, Chairman, I move on if I may to a comment, I've got absolutely no confidence that this proposal is feasible. And when it comes to the appropriate time, I should propose that we support this route as is proposed without any condition on the commercial extension.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Chairman, Keith may be able to enlighten me, although it's in my ward, not his, but I'm a bit baffled to work out who actually catches the bus at Woodcott, which is the smallest of small hamlets. It's got a delightful old church and a farmhouse. And are we really confident that people are actually catching the bus at Woodcott and Lower Woodcott Farm and Dunley? It just seems, I mean, there are stacks and stacks of places of that scale across my ward who have no bus services of any kind whatsoever. So unless there's something very special about the demographic of those locations, it seems to be sending a bus out there and back again. Maybe a complete waste of time and effort and money. I mean, a taxi service that somehow was subsidised so that those who couldn't afford it could catch it. Do we know how many residents there, for example, have bus passes? It just seems that it seems very peculiar that we run a bus out into those little tiny places, which have almost no residents at all. The residents who live there love the place, of course, absolutely delightful, but I'm just not convinced that they're bus passengers. I might be wrong.
Chair, I can clarify a few of those points. We can't get from the actual supplier the amount of people that get on at each stop. So we don't know. We know numbers. We don't know where the numbers get on. But that was one of the reasons and one of the motivations behind suggesting getting a group together to really work in the locality in liaison with Whitchurch Town Council to work that detail up. And that's where we can particularly ask about Woodcott and who gets on there.
Yes, well, all I can say is that if we're going to go down this route, and I'm sorry about the pun, if we're going to go down this route, then what I suggest is that I speak to the relevant parish council, which in that case of Woodcott is Berkeley, oddly enough, isn't it? That's Wadwick, isn't it? Oh, that's the parish meeting, you're quite right, never meets. So you can't talk to them, but I know the chap. The parish meeting is a chap, actually. I'll speak to them and see if we can knock on any doors and find out who's using this and why they need it and what other alternative provisions could be made locally. But it does seem to me odd that we're sending a bus up that little lane. Very odd. You're quite right, it is the parish meeting. I've got my parish meetings confused.
Councillor Mitchell, that would be incredibly helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Leake.
I know it isn't my ward, but I do regularly travel through Cole Henley and then Dirty Corner, I think it says. I didn't know it was that, on my way to Andover. And I notice that under option 3, which is on page 24 or something, that there seems to be a new route at Dirty Corner. Now, I know there are a couple of cottages there. I doubt there are more than 3. Have we actually ascertained that there is a demand for that extension up to Dirty Corner and back towards Cole Henley? Because I wouldn't have thought it was justified, frankly.
Yeah, that has come, Councillor Leek, from some of the service providers saying that that arm that drops down to Dirty Corner and then through the kind of what I call the back of Whitchurch, if that explains it, and back in. So it's the dashed line, exactly as you say, on page 39 of 77 on that proposed route map.
Sorry, I haven't understood your...
No, neither do I.
Your response.
The question is...
There isn't currently a bus route there, so what our service providers are saying, so in particular Basingstoke Community Transport, who run that loop around there, they are saying that if you put that route in place, that will improve residents' access to the service.
Sorry, if I could supplementary, if there are only 2 or 3 cottages, which I think there are, because I will count them more carefully the next time I go to, I thought it, yes, if there are only 2 cottages, surely we can establish whether there is a need before we send a bus out on what is quite a long journey, and particularly the route from Dirty Corner back towards Cole Henley, because they'll be competing with the Vitacrest lorries most of the time.
Councillor Leek, we'll take that on board in terms of we've got Woodcott on our list and now Dirty Corner in terms of to ask those questions within those focus groups.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Watts.
Yes, arising on what Councillor Mitchell was saying, a bit more generally, the introduction of the universal bus pass and the abolition of the tokens has changed all the dynamics. For example, in the past in Basingstoke and Dean, people had the wonderful opportunity to use their tokens for taxis, which certainly people in the rural areas used extensively. I used to use them for the train. Now it's a bus pass or nothing, and that will have changed the behaviour of people. And I think it's in the data in here that 100% of the users of Whitchurch Community Bus are using bus passes. Now, the lady who phoned me from Leverstoke, which is in Councillor Baker's ward, said we would be happy to pay something, but that's not allowed. You see, they're not allowed to pay something. You either pay your fare or you use your bus pass, and this I think has had ramifications all over the place now. In that the thing's either a commercial fare or it's free, whereas people will lose it because it's not economic. When they would have been prepared to pay something, there would have been more income. And I don't know what the answer is to that, but I believe there are probably some people coming from Woodcote or Dunley, or well, certainly from Lichfield, using their bus passes. And I don't think they spend a lot when they get to Whitchurch, but of course the economy of Whitchurch is helped by this traffic.
And Councillor Mitchell, thank you.
Yes, I'm glad we had an explanation of soft market testing. I'd just like to come back to that in a second, but I have another question first. On page 35 of 77, under the heading of option 3, what does increased fares mean? I'm not clear what fares we're going to increase, on what routes and how.
It's not an increase in the fare per se, Councillor Mitchell. It's an increase in their fare income. So at the moment, their fare income is 0.5%. The fact that there would be a commercial route that they would charge for at either end, that's income for them on that general route, which reduces the subsidy to the council.
If I can just add to that as well, because as we've already demonstrated, 90, I don't know how many percent are all but literally probably 1 or 2 people are concessionary fare users. That concessionary fare is borne by the county council. So if the service provider chooses to increase the fare notionally, it has no effect on the individual resident who uses their pass because it's a pass. There may be a greater cost to the county council in terms of reimbursement to the provider. Does that help clarify that element?
Yeah, yes, I think it'd been helpful if it said increase the fare income to this provider, because fares means fares. And the point I was going to make about soft market testing, and it links back to what I said about going and checking out what's going on in Woodcott, is when I heard market testing the first time, I had assumed it was testing the market. What you're saying is testing the suppliers, not the market. And I think we should be very, very careful across the piece here, not to be led by suppliers. I fully understand that the suppliers have an informed view on all of this, and their informed view is very important. But that's not the same as doing what they would like us to do, or what makes sense to them, if we are funding the service. And I would like to think that our market testing is with potential bus users predominantly, and the only market testing with suppliers is to say, how would you best do this? And I appreciate that's what you mean by what you're saying here. But the other thing, picking up the most recent thing that Mark said, is yes, the county picks up the tab for bus passes. That means that the taxpayer picks up the tab. And this is a bit silly if we say, that's okay if the county pay for it, but not okay if we pay for it. We aren't paying for anything. The taxpayer's paying for all of it. Okay, we've got money coming in from investments which reduce the taxes on the taxpayer, but everything we spend on anything, we or the county council or the government, ultimately is a cost to the taxpayer. We're using the taxpayer's funds. So it's slightly artificial to say it's a better deal if it goes to and it doesn't really matter what the fares are because it's coming off the bus pass costs, because the bus pass costs have to be negotiated between the supplier, the county, and the government. Some of it's subsidised and some of it's not. So, and in any case, it's all taxpayers' money.
Chair, in terms of the soft market testing comment, Councillor Mitchell, soft market testing is a common term referred to in any of our procurement processes, common within that profession, but it does mean service provider. It's not the engagement with the service user. Obviously, what we've put into this option is that there is service user engagement in terms of liaising with Whitchurch Town Council and the local parishes surround that could benefit from this route.
I understand that, but that's local government jargon, which is exactly the reverse of what it would mean in the commercial world. Market testing is your market, is you test your market, not you ask your suppliers what they want to do for you and how much they're going to charge. That's procurement. And I'm not saying you shouldn't use the language. If that's the language common across local government in this new world, that's fine by me, but it does need explaining to residents who might read this sort of stuff, because they will totally misunderstand what we're saying.
Point taken about the residents, Councillor Mitchell, but this isn't a local government thing. This is national procurement. So anything that is procured by any company, private or public sector. So I'll agree to disagree on the soft market testing.
Thank you. We're just going to now ask the officer if we can to try and assimilate the comments for us on that particular case study.
These comments really have emanated from one or two members, so I'm not sure whether they're a view of an individual or the committee, so we need to decide that. But Councillor Watts, you said that you had no confidence in the commercial extension of the withdrawal of the Whitchurch bus.
I certainly said that, and I would actually like to make a proposal and ask the committee to support it, that we support this proposed new route, although I have to say Councillor Leeks now put great doubts in my mind, but detach it from any condition on the commercial extension.
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. So is that general agreement for everybody? I could just have a...
I think the point I made was going to be investigated, and I think Councillor Watts agreed that there were these only two houses. So I'm happy to support him, provided that includes looking again at that little extension of the route, because I really would want to know that that was sensible and viable.
Chair, I can confirm any work that we're going to be doing in this area, I think it would be wise and prudent to do that work with Whitchurch Town Council and look at those particular areas that have come up tonight. Obviously, the only effect of not having the commercial extension is that actually it will increase the subsidy to the Borough Council. So, in fact, our charges would go up because it's a bigger route.
Can I make it clear? I'm only saying I don't want the route to be conditional on the commercial extension. I have great doubts, but if someone can make the commercial extension work, I'm not going to oppose it. I don't want it to be a condition for this going through.
Yeah, I think there's general agreement from that from the committee, of those particularly that have knowledge of the area as well. We'll move on to case study 2 now, which is the services 21 through to 24, and you'll find this on page 40 of the reports. Open that up to questions, please.
This is except for the fact that it goes to Newbury, which no doubt members will oppose. It's in my ward entirely, and I agree with the proposed option.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner.
As somebody not in the ward, I totally agree with Horace. Yes, this one is absolutely sensible going to Newbury, because that is where people would want to go.
Okay, so
But he needs one. The one that is actually taking the traffic and therefore getting a much lower per passenger subsidy is the one that makes sense. But it's the connection with the main route, which is the real sensible one, because that was put in place explicitly to support a large new housing development, a high proportion of which is affordable dwellings, and therefore you've got a concentration of population. It's a very tightly packed development, which is very much a local individual community within the parish, and its only possible route is to go into Tesco's at Newbury, which is what this is designed, on the edge of Newbury, which is what that's designed to do, and it makes absolute sense. The other one I don't think will be much missed. But the other thing I was going to say in terms of ward and rural matters, in connection with this business of getting into the town, it's mainly shopping people go into the town for, to be realistic. The people who can't afford to have a car usually can't afford to go to the theatre either. And the elderly people who can walk about the place go to events in the village. And the idea that they're isolated, if they live in one of our villages, that they have all sorts of clubs and societies running in the village halls and the churches, and if they want to go to anything, they'll get there, and there's lots of people will pick them up and take them there as we arrange. If somebody becomes invalided in some way and unable to drive or hasn't got a car, we have services. We have people who will pick them up and take them to local events. They won't take them 100 miles or 50 miles, but they will take them to events in the village very readily, and that sort of informal neighbour care, if you like. And that's how it operates. But the idea that they're isolated because they can't come to Basingstoke or go to Reading or somewhere, in my mind, is quite nonsense.
thank you. And Councillor Potter.
I mean, at risk of offending Councillor Mitchell once again, but I mean, the point I made previously, I make consistently. I think really all I've ever argued for, I think in this connection, is that on whatever way I describe it, a cross-subsidy basis, those authorities who obviously benefit, inverted commas, from the influx of people into commercial centres who do buy goods and provide income for those local traders should contribute in some way to the provision of the transport that brings them in. It's not much more complicated than that. I mean, I always take comfort on the basis I'm unlikely to offend Councillor Mitchell's constituents on the basis that most of them haven't heard of Basingstoke anyway, so I'm probably not going to offend them by anything I say.
Okay. Thank you. If I could...
So, I mean, we subsidise the central shuttle, or which takes people coming on a train from the station to Basing View. It seems to me that we're not thinking clearly of some
From
of us
outside
anyway.
the borough.
Then they come from outside the borough.
Thank you. If I could ask the officer now to just sum up the answer, I think pretty much it's agreed.
The only thing on that one was just general support for the proposal, and the other point brought up by Councillor Potter was picked up in the earlier points in the under the general comments.
Thank you. So we're now moving on to case study 4, which is starting at page 61.
Chairman, I'll have to go because the
And
bus
this is
about
our
to
evening
ask us
pilot.
to leave.
If I can open it up for questions, please. Okay, there appears to be no questions. Comments? Councillor Gardner.
Right. I think this is a splendid idea, and it's about time that the initiative was put in place. I think it's disgusting that the commercial companies can't provide the service, but in the absence of a service, it is needed. It is needed by the residents of the borough. It is needed by the businesses in the borough. There are numerous cases of youngsters who want to work of an evening in the borough but can't get home, which either means an expensive taxi, their parents have to pick them up, or they give up the job because they just can't afford to do it. And I think that is totally unfair. So I think as a pilot, it's fine. I don't think it goes far enough, because there are people that do work in the week rather than just Fridays and Saturdays. But it's a start, and let's see how it goes.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you. One of the biggest issues that we face in wards like Brighton Hill, Southam, and those outlining areas of the town is bus services at night, and it really is an issue that constantly is being raised with us. But my concern is this pilot is going to be running on a Friday and a Saturday, but those people that raise the issue with us is about going to work, going to college, many of them are shop workers, so it isn't on a Friday and a Saturday, it's throughout the week. And I'm not sure that's going to measure the need and is going to give a true reflection. And so I think we need to think about that, whether if it is going to be on a Friday and Saturday, is that going to reflect the need? I also ask that if we are going to do it as a pilot, that we really advertise it and people are very clear, because it will take a while for people to understand the pattern, and people are having bus services change continually at the moment, and they're getting very confused. And if young people particularly are going to use this service, and we need to demonstrate that there is a need to then develop it further, we need to make sure that we advertise it. But I think that this is not about that Friday, Saturday night service into town. This is more about people coming into work in the town, shop workers, and having to get home, and those people wanting to go to college and college courses, and that isn't about Friday and Saturday. So I think we need to think maybe again about the pilot, and is that the nights that are more relevant to people, and that is going to show the demand. But there clearly is, and that clearly is an issue. We've started a petition, and lots of people have already signed the petition to have a service extended after 9 o'clock.
Councillor Leek.
Just for my own interest, could Councillor Mr. Jones just tell me what time the shops close? I mean, I didn't know shops actually kept open after 8 o'clock in the evening. But why there is the demand after 9 o'clock?
Look, if you're a worker and you're a waitress in a restaurant in town, or if you work in the cinema, there's lots of different places in the town that are employing people, particularly young people. One of the things that was raised with me this weekend was about their children going into work in the evening and not finishing until late and not being able to get home. If you remember, when we had the QMC and people came to speak to us with a petition, and they were talking about how they got home late at night, and they felt that they wanted to be independent of their parents but weren't able to do so, and they felt very nervous about walking along the side of the road. And I think that the young woman that came to speak to us was from Chilham, and was talking about her fear about walking home. But it is about all different types of employment. And then at Christmas time, the shops are open late. There's lots of other employment. A lot of young people working the offices in town, cleaning the offices. There's lots of different forms of employment that, and also young people working in the hospital. I could go on and on about the different forms of employment, but it's also the evening classes that QMC and also BCOT are running, and some of the schools are running as well.
Thank you for that. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairman. This is really targeted at, I think, the Cabinet member rather than anybody else. What the paper, and I've no doubt that there is a demand for these services. I'd be very surprised if there wasn't. We don't know, however, what the nature, pattern and scale of the demand is, and I may have missed it. What I didn't see in the paper is the criteria against which the pilot will be evaluated. And I don't think we should be agreeing to a pilot without agreeing the criteria for evaluation, because we all know that if you provide something, stopping providing it is always a really big row. And you've got to have a rationale up front that says, how are we going to evaluate this against what criteria? What will we regard as value for money and success, and delivering the benefits that we're expecting to get from it? I do urge that before this goes to Cabinet, we get circulated a set of criteria for success, criteria for evaluation, and some when that's going to happen, how it's going to happen, how it's going to be reported, and against what scales it will be judged. Not trying to stop it by any means, but it will be difficult to stop it unless you've got those in place. And it will be difficult to persuade those who want to stop it from happening that it's good value for money unless you've got those in place. So either way, it's going to kill somebody's golden goose.
Councillor Gary Watts.
Chair, I really support this. As Councillor Gardner said, it's a good start. I mean, when these cuts happened a couple of years ago, I mean, we were inundated with phone calls and letters from residents saying we can't get out of town past 9:15 out to Hatchwarren, Chinham, South Hammond. So it's a start. And as Councillor Mitchell talks about subsidies, we just discussed Whitchurch, where we're subsidising £12,000 for what I can read at statistics is about 30 passengers using this service all year. And here we're talking about £7,800 where we're going to use, where there's going to be thousands of people actually using these buses, because during the summer I happen to play cricket in the town centre, and I get a bus home. I used to get a bus home on that particular time, 10:30, whenever it was, and they were packed. And people were bewildered when they actually stopped, because I reckon they must be making some money on those particular lines. So I think it's a good start, and I'm sure people would welcome it in the communities. But I do agree with Councillor James that we need to advertise it, because we haven't had a service for a couple of years, and people get into their ways and we really need to advertise it. And it says in the report that we might have potential for actually making some money from this service, so the subsidy might actually go down. So I think advertising is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell.
I don't know why, but
do it on purpose,
yeah, I'm sure you do. But you should try doing it with some thought. You may not quite have noticed because I didn't say it at the time, but the recommendation for the service in my ward was to reduce the service and reduce the cost, and I said I supported it. So please don't accuse me of any hypocrisy. I'm not the one with the hypocritical approach to other people's wards.
Thank you. If I could just ask the officer to now sum up the comments.
I've just general support for the pilot scheme. We should be clear on what the criteria for the evaluation of it is, and that it's covering the correct nights of the week to meet needs. And the second point was that if it is taken forward, then it should be well publicised.
Thank you. Yes, please. Thank you.
Chair, could I just ask members, when we discussed the Service 154, it also incorporated talking about 2 taxi shared services. If members have made all their comments on that case study and they are understood, absolutely fine, but we just wanted to be clear if there were any comments on the taxi shares, there weren't any noted by the lead officer, and we'd be happy to hear them.
It's okay, Councillor Leake.
I said earlier that I supported Councillor Mrs. Tucker's idea that we support a dial-a-ride, but I did also say that the taxi service is actually something that we should also look at. I think they're interchangeable in my view, and therefore if we decide that the large route isn't sensible, and we then decide that the 2 smaller circles aren't viable, then I do think we should be looking back at the taxis and the dial-a-ride. Thank you. And it's largely in my ward.
Thank you. So before we draw the meeting to a close, I just want to make sure that the portfolio holder is the portfolio is happy with the comments received, and this helps you guys move forward. Okay, thank you. And I'd just like to confirm the recommendation was recommend that the views of the committee are sought on Appendix A, which is the Public Transport Subsidy Review. If I could just have a general agreement that you're satisfied with the comments that we've relayed to you this evening. Thank you very much. We'll close the meeting at 9:45.